and welcome to Festival Place Social Impact, to the session Making Impact in Wilton Park, Dublin. We're going to be learning about the longitudinal research taking place at iPut Real Estate Dublin's €300 million Wilton Park development and the findings from their first year of research, the methods they are using to assess their cultural, economic, and environmental impact. My name is Christine Murray. I'm the founding director of Festival Place and editor-chief of the developer. And the purpose of this event is to come together to learn and be inspired as we understand how to make the business case for and deliver place-based impact. So thank you to our partners for supporting this event, including iPut Real Estate Dublin and Borough Happold. And thank you to our organization members for making our work possible. So please join me with some emoji applause and welcome our speakers to the Festival of Place, Marie Hunt, Head of Research at iPut Real Estate Dublin, and Camilla Sigurd-Andersen, Urban Design Research Lead at Hassel. Thank you very much. And Camilla, I think you're going to share the presentation. And while I do that, I'll remind the audience we'll be taking your questions afterwards. So do look for that Q&A tab on your chat window and do feel free to share your comments and questions with us. Well, that looks great, Camilla and Marie. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, and I hope everybody is and has been enjoying the Festival of Place event so far. As Christine said, my name is Marie Hunt and I'm Head of Research at iPut Real Estate in Dublin. And I'm joined this afternoon by my colleague Camilla Andersen from Hassel. And Camilla is the research lead for the Making Impact research, which we're going to talk to you about in this particular session. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about who iPut are, because you may not be familiar with the name, and talk to you a little bit about our scheme in Wilton Park in Dublin, which we're using as a live case study. And then Camilla will talk to you about the project itself. Over the last year, we've been working with three great placemaking and design experts, namely Hassel, PRD and GEL, on this research. And we know it will be of significant interest to many of you who are dialed in, particularly as investment in the public realm and social impact investment gathers momentum. So a little bit about iPut first. We are about a 2.8 billion fund. We own 75 assets in the Dublin market. So we're an Irish company solely invested in Dublin in both offices and logistics. About 60% of our portfolio is offices. And we have a very big focus on sustainability. And we feel that this whole focus on the S in ESG is as important as the E and the G. And that's really where the background to this research came from. So Camilla, if you just go to the next slide, you'll see that, this Making Impact report, the green report there, and we will send you all a link to this afterwards. This is the first year's report coming out of this particular research, but it isn't the first piece of thought leadership that iPut have been involved in. We've been doing research and thought leadership for many years, and indeed the Making Place report, which was 2020, and again it revised in 22, was kind of ahead of its time, looking at the impact of remote working on office markets, and this was done pre-pandemic, so it was ahead of its time in many respects. So if we just jump to the next slide, this is just showing you that iPut as a firm, we would model ourselves on, great names like Derwent and British Land in the UK market, and leading players in institutional markets worldwide. And in the Dublin market, I've been the first to develop a net zero office building, indeed the first net zero logistics building as well, and the first firm to use glulam timber frame construction. So when we look to the bottom right and look at a new neighbourhood for Dublin, again, we're leading the market in terms of this type of thinking and this holistic approach to development. And that's really why we picked this particular development to focus as our case study for this particular piece of research. For those of you who know Dublin, you will see the central business district here and some of the historical landmarks. And you can see there down in the bottom right where Wilton Park sits in relation to that. So it's a little bit on the outskirts of the CBD of the city, maybe not traditionally the heart of the office district, but we feel that with the work that we're doing here, we're going to make it a nice place to be for everybody, and we could encourage more footfall into this part of the city. The next slide just looks at some of what we've done at this scheme, and I'll talk to you in a moment about the history of it and how it all came about. But as part of our development here, we inherited a 1 acre park We reopened that park to the public, and we've been putting in various interventions, artistic, cultural, etc., having events in the park. The screen on the top right is the biggest canvas in Europe for showcasing local art. We called it the Living Canvas, and it has won numerous awards, was a really talking point in Dublin, particularly during COVID. We use photo benches in the park, similar to what you might see in somewhere like King's Cross, to showcase up-and-coming Irish artists. And we've done simple interventions as well, the likes of the deck chairs in the park, to encourage more people to sit and enjoy the facility. So if we just jump down to the next slide, this is a photo that was taken not that long ago, in January of this year, because the work is still very much underway on site here. So this was a drone footage from January, and the park doesn't look very nice here because we've essentially dug the entire thing up, and we're doing a very significant restoration of the park at the moment. The building on the left is called One, if you just go back up, sorry, Camilla. The building on the left is One Wilton, and that's fully occupied at the moment. The two buildings in the center, 2, 3, are almost complete and will be complete later this year, and building 4 is complete. And what's significant about this is all 4 buildings have been pre-let to LinkedIn as their European headquarters. So to give you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about here, it's 600,000 square foot of offices, a 1-acre triangular park, as you can see there in the center, fully let to LinkedIn, and literally finishing over the next couple of months. And we're aiming to have some sort of an event in the park in June when all of the work is finished. So just jumping on to talk about the evolution of the park, if we look on the left-hand side there, I suppose what we're replacing here is a lot of brutalist buildings built in the 60s and not really fit for purpose, certainly not ESG compliant, and a completely overgrown and underutilized park that was locked and the public didn't have access to it. And on the right is our aspiration for what this is going to look like in July, when all of the buildings are finished, when the public square is finished, and when the park indeed is finished as well. So it's an exciting scheme. If we jump on just to the next slide, what is Making Impact? So Making Impact is the title we've given to this unique 5-year study that we're undertaking at Wilton Park, using Wilton Park as a case study. And it's important, I suppose, in relation to some of what we've heard this morning, that the ideal project, you'd be starting with a blank sheet and you'd be doing the research from the day one. And I suppose we didn't have that luxury in this scheme because the scheme was already designed and indeed underway when we commenced this piece of research. I'll talk to you a little bit about why we embarked on it and what's different about this particular piece of research, because obviously many of you who are dialed in will be doing social impact assessment and assessments of that nature, and there are lots of different frameworks. This one we feel is different, and I suppose maybe it's the longitudinal nature of it that makes it different. And we're also going to talk about the outcomes that people can look forward to. This is literally the first year's report. It will be getting more meaningful as we go into years 2, 3, and 4. So Camilla, if you just want to move on, these are just some of the key numbers from the scheme. So we've brought 3 companies together, 3 leading placemaking and design experts. We're doing the study over a 5-year period, and we're not just looking at social value, we're looking at 4 pillars: social, cultural, economic, and environmental. We're measuring 18 different areas, and we've come up with a spreadsheet that has 73 individual bespoke metrics. And we've done a lot of stakeholder interviews and intercept surveys as part of that work. So if we just go to the next slide, and I'll just use this slide to talk you through a little bit more about the study before I pass over to Camilla. So within the report itself, you'll read about the rich cultural, literary, and commercial history associated with this part of Dublin. You'll also hear about the deterioration of this particular district over time. And I've shown you the before and the after for what our aspirations are for the development and the area. But I think to truly appreciate it, you're just going to have to come to Dublin and experience it at first hand. So I'd wait until at least May, early June, and that would be the ideal time to see this in its true shining lights. I think it's fair to say that iPut are truly passionate about creating a vibrant community in this location. We're not just looking at the 4 office buildings and focusing on the needs of the occupiers within those buildings. We're very conscious of improving the lives of those who are living and working in the wider area. And I'm sure Camilla will talk about this, but there are 22,000 residents within a 5-minute walk of this park, and 74,000 employees within a 15-minute walk of it as well. So we're servicing a huge community. And I suppose our ambition really is to bring life back into this part of Dublin and deliver something that, one, delivers a return for our investors and our shareholders, but we're thinking beyond just the financial return. Some of you might know the recent emerging trends report that came out from ULI. And one of the statistics that really stood out for me in that is that when 1,000 real estate stakeholders were asked, in Europe I should say, were asked about their thoughts, they said 1/3 of them were willing to forego some financial return in order to improve environmental and social impact. So to have 1/3 of respondents saying that when this topic is really just starting to gain momentum suggests that we should watch that over the coming years. Social impact and economic impact are really starting to be talked about a lot more. And it's something that iPut are very passionate about. I should say as well, there's no legislation in Ireland making us consider these things. So we don't have the Social Value Act that you might have in the UK. We're doing it of our own volition because we really think that it's the right thing to do. And we want to tailor it to the needs of the local neighbourhood, not just putting uses in there that we think that they need, but really engaging with the community and making a difference. I think if you Google the term making impact, you'll find that it means to have a powerful effect or a powerful influence. And we'd like to think that that's what we're doing for Wilton Park. In addition to the economic benefits, and I know Christine mentioned the figure of €300 million investment into this part of the city, we wanted to have social, cultural, environmental and economic benefits, and hence they're the 4 pillars that we're concentrating. But how do we prove both to ourselves and to our shareholders that doing this is the right thing to do? And how do we encourage people like the public sector that investing in placemaking and public realm and developing places with people in mind is doing the right thing? So that's why we decided to undertake this piece of research. We wanted to use our findings to guide our own investment strategy, but equally to ensure that all our efforts are evidence-based, and that if something isn't working, that we use the data and the information to glean what we can do to change it. In late 2022, we put out a request for proposals for a company to help us in this quest and to help us devise a strategy. And I'm really pleased that there's not just one company, but 3 very strong brands in their own right, and that is Hassel, PRD and Gell, all of whom are leading urban design and placemaking experts. So we felt all 3 brought something quite different to the table, but combined a very, very strong team. Our aim is to track the evolution over the next 5 years in real time and use the benefits, as I said, for the local community, but also we're willing to share the research with the wider community as well, because we feel a rising tide lifts all boats. I always say that a good research study should answer a question that people want answered. And I think that this is exactly what this study is trying to do. We will share the findings, as I said. And again, I know that many of you dialed in are already immersed in this topic and have devised different methodologies for valuing social value. So we're always interested to hear what other people are doing as well. Our hope is that the Wilton Park Impact Framework and the Making Impact research will join a growing body of research on this topic, and that specialists in the field, like many of you dialed in, will refer to the study when discussing social value and successful impact investing for decades to come. So I'll now pass you over to Camilla, who will talk to you in a little bit more detail about the Making Impact study itself and the findings from our first year's research. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie, and thank you everyone for dialing into this talk today. And I just want to clarify those residential and employee catchments that Marie mentioned were both the 15-minute walking catchments of Wilton Park. There's about 3 to 4 times as many employees as there are residents in the area. My name is Camilla Sigar Anderson, and I am the Urban Research Lead at the International Architecture and Design Practice, HESL, and also the Project Lead for Making Impact. And I'm really excited to take the next 20 minutes or so to share our methodology and a couple of the highlights from our first year of working with iPut on measuring the impact of their investments in Wilton Park's public realm. And as Marie mentioned, there's sort of 3 companies coming together to deliver this work, led by HESL, which is a global architecture and design practice with studios in the United Kingdom, Australia, Asia, and the United States. We've also partnered with PRD, who are specialists in regeneration and measuring regeneration and socioeconomic outcomes. And then Gale, that's a Copenhagen-born urban design company renowned for their public life and public space assessments. And together we form a multidisciplinary partnership that offers different levels, different areas of expertise and tools so that we can really holistically assess iPut's impact on Wilton Park. And as Marie said as well, we appreciate that most people who are in the virtual room today have some experience of or interest in making a positive impact through the way that we shape places. So hopefully you'll see this session as an opportunity to exchange knowledge and find inspiration. As presented by Marie, Wilton Park is a 600,000 square foot development comprising a 1-acre heritage park and several important public spaces and connections. And the development has been underway for a number of years, and it's due to complete this summer. The Making Impact study is specifically looking to understand how iPut's investments in the public realm and placemaking, in programming and events, and in the governance and management of this place together shape what you might call a world-class urban experience that contributes value across 4 different pillars of impact, namely the social, cultural, environmental, and economic areas. And in other words, we will be focused on everything that happens between the buildings and along the edges of the buildings, where this development integrates with the city's public realm and with the surrounding communities. And this approach really reflects iPut's commitment to be stewards of their neighborhoods and not just their buildings. And we hope that our findings over the next 5 years can help make the case for further investments in placemaking, not just for iPut, but across the industry as well. The 5-year study will be guided by an impact framework, which we carefully developed in the beginning of last year, so 2023, from a pretty extensive project and place analysis. Between January and May 2023, we interviewed 20 internal and external stakeholders. We facilitated workshops, conducted site visits, and reviewed existing best practice approaches and studied Wilton Park's history and local planning context. And that was all to enable us to set forward this theory of change. And together with that, in evaluation strategy that was really tailored to Wilton Park, together with a detailed research methodology that consists of different research guides, templates, and survey tools. And this entire process is documented in an internal report. And I know you can't read the details of what's on the screen right now, but in total, what that table on the right-hand side shows is 20 different areas of reporting. And across our team and iPut, we've distributed the responsibilities for each of these areas. So for example, at HESL, we're in charge of gathering data from an audience intercept survey, which we'll distribute a couple of times a year. PRD are responsible for looking at things like property valuations. Gale is responsible for annual detailed public life observations. And each of those reporting areas then feeds into that same framework. which is the Wilton Park Impact Framework. So following our theory of change, this framework is structured into 3 levels of impact. There's what we aim to achieve in the long term, what we're working towards every day, and then what's actually being done on the ground to achieve those objectives. So at the vision level, the focus is on tracking progress against a number of overarching commercial success measures, namely how valuable, how vibrant, and how loved the neighborhood becomes. And the metrics that underpin these measures include, for example, property valuations, footfall volumes, and things like visitor sentiment and sense of belonging, which is a measure that we've heard other teams look at as well for other projects. Ultimately, our aspiration is to showcase how Wilton Park is evolving towards the vision of becoming a vibrant, integrated, and resilient neighborhood that enriches the cultural, economic, and community life of Dublin. The 4 pillars of impact come in at the objectives level, which is set out to balance social, cultural, environmental, and economic value. Through a set of 12 measures, which you can see on the screen now, covering 43 individual qualitative and quantitative metrics, we will demonstrate how Wilton Park is making strides towards becoming an inviting public space, a place that celebrates art and culture, a development that champions green values, and also a world-class commercial destination. So we are, for example, measuring cultural engagement by how many visitors come to view public installations and the experience they have of that. And we're measuring things like economic opportunity by metrics such as internships and training opportunities provided. And then at the actions level, we are focused on mapping the actual breadth and depth of iPut's investments in the public realm, in programming and governance. And you'll sort of remember that Venn diagram from earlier. So for example, with the public realm, we'll be looking at the actual physical changes. So if I put up planting 20 trees, that's a physical investment in place. We would hope to see that the nature engagement improves and that the environmental quality of the place improves. And that in terms might drive more footfall, or it might drive people to feel more personally connected to the place. So you see how the layers sort of start to weave together. And similarly, in programming, we'll be looking at things like what events are being organized. I would have, as Marie said in the past, been organizing yoga events, and that have improved local engagement, which has also made the place more vibrant. And as we know, more footfall drives property values and drives economic outcomes as well. And in the governance dimension, we're looking at investments in things like training and on-site personnel. And these connections can obviously play out to both positive and negative effects. So if we find out that a certain investment isn't having the desired outcomes at the objectives level, and therefore isn't working towards our vision, then that's something that the research will reveal as well over this 5-year study. To date, iPut has already implemented investment initiatives valued at over 7 million euros, which would have been felt by the public visiting the site. That figure doesn't account for the ongoing changes that are still in progress. And with that, I mean particularly the completion of the park and the public realm around the remaining buildings. Altogether, this framework then is structured into the 3 tiers, encompassing a total of 18 measures, all of which are then further detailed in a spreadsheet containing 73 individual metrics that are not PowerPoint friendly. Each year, we will report on our progress by collecting data both from iPut, from the site, and then from the daily visitors and the users of the space. And we'll gather this information through interviews, surveys, observational studies, desktop data analysis. You'll remember the 20 reporting areas I presented earlier. And as recently as last week, actually, we had people on site who were looking at how the current construction and winter conditions are impacting people's experiences of the place. And all of these findings are then recorded internally so we can track the changes year on year. And then the most interesting findings are summarized in a public impact report that everyone can download and hopefully take something from. So the report you can download now is sort of reports on the period from 2018 to the summer 2023. And our focus for last year's study was to understand the transformations that have unfolded so far while the construction has been underway until the park closed for refurbishment. And we're currently working on the 2024 installment, which will report on sort of the investments and initiatives over the last year. And we just want to share a couple of our findings so far. As Marie said, this is the first step on a longer journey, and we've got a methodology, we've sort of tested it, and now we're at the point of setting it into sort of continuous, starting this continuous feedback loop. But we do have some lessons that we've learned already, which is really, I think, encouraging to find that even after sort of just a year, you can learn a lot. At a very high level, there's sort of 6 lessons which we think are worth carrying forward into the next years. The first is not to underestimate the impact of small gestures, such as the provision of movable deck chairs or just the availability of a decent cup of coffee. We do a lot for a place. The second is the importance of taking a personal approach, even in today's world, which is full of digital technology and advanced manufacturing techniques. It's still people that make places. The third is the value of establishing trusted partnerships. So we understand that no one can do everything on their own, but together we've also seen that we might achieve more than either one organization could have imagined. The fourth is about taking this holistic approach to impact investing. So great places are not just the paving stones and the benches, or their yoga classes and their coffee shop, or their maintenance regimes. Great places, sort of all of those things working together. The fifth lesson is that the first step to making an impact really is to make an effort. And it is true that not all efforts have the same impact, but we have to try and fail and then try again to eventually succeed and get it right. And finally, of course, we've seen the importance of remaining flexible to changing circumstances. And that was something the pandemic taught everyone. But if it's taught us anything about placemaking, it really is that it are the places that are flexible, that are diverse, and that are well integrated, that endure. We're going to take a few minutes now just to look at a few of the specific stories that have caught our attention as well over the last year. So these are sort of the highlights then. This is a little bit more of a deep dive, and we'll start with a social impact story, which is about improving the perceptions of safety. So for many people, Wilton Park hasn't always felt like a safe place to walk and spend time, especially sort of after sunset. Yet we know and we understand that feeling safe is one of the fundamental aspects of successful public spaces. So IPUT have been addressing issues of safety through a number of different initiatives, which include implementing new pedestrian paths, making sure that the area is clean and well maintained, and by increasing the transparency of the buildings so that there are more connections between the indoor and the outdoor spaces. And of course, 2-4 Wilton is still under construction, but we've already heard some really positive feedback about the way that 1 Wilton, which is the building you can see on the screen now, has been able to bring sort of light and life to the streets, so big windows and well-lit spaces in a way that the former brutalist buildings weren't able to do. And the results are that more than half the people we surveyed do feel who've been visiting the area continuously over a longer period of time do feel that the sense of safety has improved. And there's only a couple of percentage of people who reported a negative impact. And overall, we consider those to be really positive results, and even more so in the interviews with people that have lived or worked in the area for a long period of time. It's really great to hear that women feel safer walking home from work late at night now, for example, than they would have done 5 or 10 years ago. That's good for people's sense of well-being. It's good for their quality of life. But those sorts of initiatives will also have a positive impact on the local economy, for example, because you'll have more footfall to the area and through the area. Cultural impact story really is about iPut's commitment to culture and art and creativity. iPut have really taken a very proactive approach in weaving culture into the ethos of Wilton Park from the outset. And there's 2 projects that stand out in this respect. First, there's the living canvas that Marie mentioned, and which you can sort of see in the background in the picture here as well. It was I believe it was Europe's first outdoor digital screen dedicated exclusively to arts and culture, which means no commercials. And over 10 seasons, it's featured 122 artists presenting close to 100 individual works of art. The screen has provided a platform for a diverse mix of contributors, from young and emerging artists who are still building their profile to established and celebrated international artists. And along with this canvas, iPut has also been providing free studio space to established and emerging artists. And at the time when we were doing the data for this report, 15 artists had benefited from 6 to 12 month residencies at Wilton Park. Both those initiatives have been delivered in partnership with the Royal Hibernian Academy, which is a partnership that has ensured that the investment is targeted in a way that maximizes the long-term benefit to the artists. And plans are now underway to secure a longer-term cultural legacy, including via the provision of permanent space within the completed scheme. As an environmental impact story, we're talking about the importance of Wilton Park as a green lung in a neighborhood that doesn't actually have a lot of green sort of spaces. There's the canal, but sort of not green lawns where people can sit in larger groups and enjoy a lunchtime rest or sort of a weekend activity. And we know green spaces are really important in cities to help maintain a healthy ecosystem and to provide people with places to relax both their minds and with places to exercise their bodies. And the 1.3 acre green space at Wilton Park is the only green space that is accessible within a 5-minute walk for more than 7,600 local employees and 1,100 local residents. Yet until iPut took over the leads of the park, it was historically a private space. When they took over the ownership of the park, until then it was historically a private space with quite inconsistent access for the general public. It was often closed off to the public. iPut quickly changed that. They implemented regular opening hours. They provided deck chairs to invite people to come in and use the space. They also did some initial tree and plant maintenance. And the results were that when people were surveyed in May 2023, so this was before the park closed for its sort of full-scale restoration, over half of people said that they had noticed improvement to Wilton Park's green spaces, and 1 in 5 people would say that they came to the area specifically to enjoy or engage with nature. As an economic impact story, we've sort of picked up this story of iPut supporting the local College of Amenity Horticulture. It's clear that a scheme of this scale has the potential to deliver a significant economic impact, both locally and for the city more broadly. And I think especially when the scheme opens and some of the commercial spaces are up and running, and we'll see much more of that play out. But during the development phase of the park, over the past 4 years, the iPut's partnership with Tugish has provided 3 groups of students with work experience that's linked to Wilton Park, which has given the students a chance to learn about landscape design and urban planning in practice. And the students have benefited from iPut's time, from the facilities, knowledge, insights, and cooperation, which from the students' point of view has been highly beneficial and valuable as an experience. And this partnership has also helped cement industry engagement as part of Tugish's courses, and this collaboration is obviously still ongoing. From an economic perspective, as you say, sort of the footprint of Wilton Park is still relatively nascent, with much of the floor space and associated footfall still to complete. But we look forward to sort of seeing the impact of that over the next couple of years. So these are just a few examples of our discoveries from this year, and I hope that some of those findings and sentiments either been familiar to you or resonates with you. We do think it's important to reflect on the positive stories to date, because they show us that change is possible, and hopefully they give us and iPut and other developers the confidence and the trust and the energy to keep working and do more and also do better tomorrow. Because when we talk about making vibrant and resilient neighborhoods, there is always going to be a tomorrow that comes with more expectations, greater expectations, new opportunities, and evolving requirements. And that's why the longitudinal nature of this study is really interesting as well. And this year we've learned a lot about what people might need from Wilton Park in the future. And we've also identified ways for iPut to better direct their investments towards those areas of improvement. We'll be coming up to questions just in a second, which will be really interesting to respond to your feedback. But some of the things we are hoping to see in the coming years will be that while the use of the park has increased in recent years, we would like to see more activity in this area, especially on weekends. We mentioned it's primarily an employment district, so it would be great to start providing more amenities and more things of interest for Dublin's families. And we'd like to see more children and families come here and enjoy the area. Together with more activity, we hope to see the local economy come to life, with more footfall for existing businesses and also new destinations for people to visit. And we'd like to see more biodiversity and more people engaging with nature in an active way. And then it would be really fantastic to have people engage with this ongoing cultural offer as well. I think iPut's commitment to bringing sort of high quality art into the public realm is really remarkable. And it is something that will be instrumental to shaping the future identity of Wilton Park. And listening to the public's feedback, we also hope that the future provision of new water features, invitations to play, enhanced greenery, artful interventions, hospitality offers, and spaces to relax and socialize will be welcome additions to the neighborhood. But above all, we've learned the importance of staying flexible and staying attentive so that we can continue to adjust as we go. So that has been a bit of an overview of what we are aiming to achieve with this project. I think just reflecting on some of the case studies we saw this morning, it's obviously a much smaller scale of development, but it still, I think, has really incredible opportunities to have an impact that expands sort of well beyond the site boundary that iPut has ownership over.
Thanks so much, Camilla and Marie. That was super interesting. I don't know, Marie, do you want to start? Do you have any reflections or things to add, I suppose, from Camilla's overview?
Just the screen, this page that we have up on screen at the moment. If you look in the bottom right there, you'll see the link to the www.iput.com website. And there's a whole section on there on Making Impact. And you can also download the Making Impact first year report directly from there. And that has all the detail much more so than we've been able to do in our time on screen today. There's also an iPut podcast called Shaping Our City, where we explore the future of cities and workplace. And one of those episodes features Camilla talking about the study as well. So if anybody has time to listen into that. But I'm happy to open to questions now. It's been a phenomenal 12 months, being that we only put RFPs out in October 22. We appointed the team in January of 23, and we already have 1 year's output and are well underway on year 2. So it's been a very interesting 15 months.
Well, I'm going to kick off with a question from Susan Emmett, who's Social Value Director at Stantec. And she asks you to expand a little bit about the land use on the development. So I think this one's for you, Marie. Like, what percentage is office? Did your plans change post-COVID for the mix of offices, or did the nature of the office lets? You mentioned they're all let to LinkedIn.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
So I would go back a step and say that this study commenced as it did in October 23, but the planning on this site went back several years before that. And in fact, construction had commenced before COVID. And the scheme that we got planning for is primarily an office scheme. It's 600,000 square foot in total. And there's an element then of retail in the ground floor units as well. But it's predominantly offices, and LinkedIn pre-let the entire of the office for their European headquarters. They're occupying 2 of the buildings or one of the buildings, fitting out a second one, and the other 2 are due for completion this year. The retail elements and the public space will be also opening in line with the park reopening. So I would say by June of this year, we'll have a lot to look at. But right now, it's still very much a construction site.
So there wasn't really any change, I guess, through that process. I mean,
once you've got your planning, it's very difficult to go back in retrospectively and change it. And I suppose that's why this study is a little bit different, in that usually when you see hassle involved, for example, or Gale, it would be at the outset of a project when you're designing it. But it's important to say that this project does not involve design. We started this after we were already midway through construction.
Yeah, but I think
so. I guess that element that really brings people together. There's a question here by Claire Richards about from Footwork about the park. I mean, the park is really, seems quite key to this neighborhood and to this development in terms of the greater community. So she asks what the long-term commitment is being made regarding the upkeep of the park. Parks always get questions about maintenance. So is the community likely to be involved in the maintenance of the park, and what is the plan? Who will care for the park?
will care for the park long term. We own the park. We're opening it to the public as a gesture of goodwill, but IPAT look after the security and the planting of the park and everything to do with the park. So the community are welcome to use it, but they're not involved in the upkeep and the maintenance of it. We're the long-term holders and owners and managers of it.
And I think what is just important to say there as well, in terms of what components are and aren't changing, IPAT is taking a very flexible approach to the programming of the public realm and the public facing sort of commercial, hospitality, retail, community units and spaces that there are in the development. So the fixed piece is the office piece, because there's an occupier and a planning notice to abide by. But in terms of what actually happens in that public realm and in all of those public realm facing units, I think that's where we'll see some interesting learnings and changes on the basis of those learnings.
A huge amount of effort has gone into identifying the end users for those retail units, and that will be all come to light later in the year as well. But again, suffice to say, it won't be just regular run-of-the-mill coffee shop type operators. There'll be a huge amount of thought gone into the curation, with the objective of bringing new people to this part of the city and making it a destination in its own right.
Well, you've kind of answered the next question, which is from Claire Owens, co-director at Squash Liverpool, about whether local small enterprises are going to be encouraged in those retail concessions or in the retail strategy.
Yeah, so one story we didn't highlight now, but which we could have, was that for the past couple of years, I would have provided free workspace to a local coffee shop, which is a startup business essentially. And that business is called Why Not Coffee. It's become a really integral part of the community over these last couple of years. So that's the sort of, we call that iPut's first small SME. But we'll hopefully see more of that in the coming years as well.
And I think it's interesting, there's a question from from Claire about these frameworks, about all of the different methodologies we've heard about today. Everybody kind of coming up with their own objectives for their site and then kind of choosing what they're going to measure that against. And, is there a case for uniting these frameworks? Claire Richards asks from Footwork, based on the learning that emerges from the various initiatives, do we need a single tool that everyone was so we can benchmark against each other? Or is it really about, perhaps you're measuring some of the same metrics, but you're responding to the key and differing objectives of different projects? Camilla, do you have a view on that? I mean, you've got 3 firms coming together, all with different approaches and kind of a legacy and tradition of the way that they go about researching and assessing. Do we need a common language or framework, or do we need to take a kind of from first principles approach with every place?
I think the answer is somewhere in between. I think it doesn't make sense to start from scratch in every place, and it would be great to have more of a common bank of tools and standards to pick from. But I also don't think that a single framework is going to work in every place. As we know, places are context specific, communities are unique, and that is incredible. And that is how it should be. So no, I don't think that there is one size fits all. And I think that's been the experience of everyone that's been working on these sorts of things all around the world. I do think we could get better at setting certain standards, but I also do think those standards have to come from really public sector or interest organizations that don't have profit gains. I get a little bit nervous if everyone is suddenly locked into a system which is private organization owned. But what iPut is doing here, what I think is really commendable, is that they're sharing the methodology so that other projects can pick from that what's useful to them, and then the lessons which are sort of universally applicable, I think, are the ones that we need to look at. So I do think findings like what are the little things we can do to make a big difference tomorrow? I think some of those universal findings probably are universally applicable. And so I think it's important that there's a forum for sharing lessons learned that everyone is a part of.
I would say as well,
Marie, you pointed out, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, from a Dublin context, we're doing this without being told to do it, if you know what I mean. But the latest Dublin City Development Plan has a new item in there, which means that all large office buildings that are now going for planning, 5% of the footprint has to be devoted to a cultural use. So that's a nod to culture, and a lot of developers around the city are now having to do cultural audits to justify when they're lodging a new office scheme. And our sense is that maybe by the time the next development plan comes around in 5 or 6 years' time, there could well be a social criteria in there as well, because we're hearing more about social. So that was maybe part of the thinking for doing this. But I suppose from an iPut perspective, we're using this one development within our entire portfolio as a case study, but we would hope to have learnings from that then we can apply elsewhere in our own portfolio as well, and maybe come up with a methodology that we use on some other schemes within the iPut portfolio also.
I mean, you talked about how you don't have kind of anyone else pressuring you to do this work. You've decided that you're going to kind of put your focus and attention on this and capture it. Do you have any advice for other people trying to make the case within their organizations, to pursue the kind of baseline measurement and continued measurement on their sites?
What advice would I give? I suppose we went into this a little bit blind in that we knew roughly what we wanted to do, but it was really only in chatting with the 3 teams and having workshops and really fleshing out the outcomes we wanted from our own perspective that we were able to really fully kind of appreciate the brief. So I would say the only advice I would say, somebody starting out, do as much workshopping with the client as possible to determine what they want to get out of it, and that everybody's on the same page from the outset, because once you put the methodology and the framework in place, it's not impossible, but it's quite difficult to go back and refine that as time goes on. So I would say get the message right at the very beginning and work from there. And I think in the ideal world, if I had a magic wand, I probably would have gone back a few years to the very outset when the design stage was happening, because we probably would have been able to have a better input if we were involved from day one. But the study is what it is, and we started when we started. But if we could, we would have gone back and got involved from a design stage.
So then you've got that vision in place for what you want to achieve long term, and then you're starting from that baseline. You're flowing it through the entire project from the design stage, and then
Absolutely.
measuring and refining as you go.
Yeah.
Camilla, would you agree? The earlier, the better.
Yeah, definitely. And also the more flexible, the better. I said we've got 73 metrics. You won't find all of them in the report we published this year, and it might be in 5 years that some of them never really are interesting enough to report on, in which case that'll help us go back and refine the framework itself and say, well, what were actually the metrics that made a difference? What were the metrics that moved the needle? And then those might be the ones that you put into something that becomes more of a standard tool rather than an entirely tailored tool. So in a way, this study is we're both learning from Wilton Park, but the measurement framework itself will also be refined over the course of those 5 years, and hopefully that'll sort of help that other piece that you talked about, which is, can we get better at, across lots of different developments and lots of different companies, measuring the same thing so that we can better benchmark against one another.
Is there enough transparency? I mean, you've made the point of making this methodology public, making the findings public. Do you think there's enough transparency behind the kind of emerging social impact metrics, or is there, is it harder to find clear examples of what people are doing and how it's being executed? Does it vary? Camilla.
There's a lot more now than there was even just a year ago when we started. I'd say that. And I think in 5 years, the volume of people who are sharing more openly is going to be even greater still. I think everyone will find that generosity, because this is about creating better places for people. It's really about being generous towards society, and holding your methodology cards close to your chest isn't doing that. And I think that the more literate people become in these areas of the development industry, the more we will see and people lift the lid on their processes as well.
And I think from an investment perspective, what I would say is it's the exact same argument as, if I invest in developing the most sustainable buildings, will I get a rental premium as an occupier, or will I pay a slightly keener yield as an investor for that asset? And I think it's only now, after years of investment into this, that we're beginning to see there actually is a premium, both from a rental point of view and a yield perspective. And I think this is the exact same question. If I really believe in and invest in the social side and create places for people and invest in public realm and placemaking, ultimately will that add value to me from an investment perspective? And our answer to that is absolutely it will, over the long term. And I suppose what this research is going to do is make the case and prove that, so that when these questions come up, that we've got a data-driven piece of evidence that shows, yes, there is a premium for doing the right thing.
And then, of course, that social resilience that comes into it. In fact, that links to a final question that's come in from Brian Quinn. Are potential tenants like the one you secured for this development pushing you to have that social impact approach? Or are tenants looking at integrating the ESG objectives with yours on the site? So will your tenant be looking to continue, perhaps doing their own internal measurements around staff retention, or, is that an appealing link up between tenant and site?
I would say occupiers are not coming to us specifically asking, for social elements, but what they are saying is we want the best quality office space for our people and we want public realm. So indirectly, we're doing it anyway. And I think for lots of firms that are scratching their heads going, how do we do social impact? In many respects, they're probably doing it already, but they're not calling it social impact. So for some people, it can be, down to their diversity and inclusion policies. It can be, diversity in terms of construction on their sites. So there's lots of things that people are already doing, but they're not necessarily badging it social value. But I think over the next while, we'll see a huge amount more focus on it. And I think particularly in an Irish context where it hasn't been anything until now, but we're watching across the water to the UK and seeing the impact of the Social Value Act and the discipline really growing. And our suspicion is it's going to become very significant in Ireland over the next couple of years.
And just to add to that piece of research that I put out in 2020, which I was also fortunate to be involved in, that was looking at, well, what does the future workplace really look like in relation to the city? And as Marie said, this was right at the beginning of, it was sort of started before the pandemic, and then we went into the pandemic with that study. But what that set out is that employees are humans as well. Employees want to be in places that make them feel comfortable, that make them feel inspired, that make them enable them to socialize, that enable them to grow it as human beings. A lot of the same qualities that are really embedded within the city. And so developing workplaces in a way that integrates with vibrant neighborhoods is a way to build resiliency for your workplace. And as we know, when our workplaces are working well, then and people work together, then the work culture is better as well, and the productivity of our companies go up. So as Marie said, in that way, tenants are sort of asking for it, but just without maybe knowing exactly what it is that they're asking for.
Well, that kind of brings us to the close of this session. So I want to thank everyone for their questions, and thank you, Marie and Camilla, for sharing this project with us and some of your early findings. It seems really exciting, and I hope we can continue to be updated and find out about the next research as it comes around.
Thank you.
So that brings this session to a close. But I'm sure if people have questions, Marie, Camilla, would you encourage them to reach out to you both and to ask further questions about making impact?
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem.
Of course.
Great. And we will be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. with Making the Business Case for Impact with Maria Ribera-Carbo from the Institute of Human Rights and Business, as well as a full program running tomorrow. You can see everything happening in the schedule tab. And please remember that all the talks are recorded and available to view after the event. You'll find that in the schedule tab as well. So thanks for watching, and thanks to our partners for this event, I Put Real Estate Dublin and Borough Happold. And the Making Impact report is in the resources tab. We'll also have the links, and we'll be sending out an email with those resources for you as well, so that you'll have everything that you need at the close of the day, including the slides. Okay, thank you both. And that concludes today's programming, and we'll see you tomorrow.